and say good morning. Hey, how you doing? Come dinner here. There you go. You don't want to say hello? He can see you.
You probably look like Chappie. Hello, John. How are you? Good to see you.
Things are pretty good. So I thought I'd tune in. My daughter is in New York City, and she always bails me out when I press a button that I shouldn't and get jammed up, and then I go into full panic mode. This is my eighth seminar, so I shouldn't have any trouble, and I sure shouldn't panic. But when there's all these people online, you know, then it's like I get really nervous. So nice to see you every time you're on here. I don't remember you asking a question yet, but nice to see you. Jim Perrell, nice to see you. Brent Reich-Schneider, see you. I don't see you, but I see that you're on. So some other people have got, you know, like confusing names like Jay. It's like, I don't know. Maybe I worked on your car once. Maybe not. So I was at a Grand Rapids Iron and Metal yesterday buying a piece of aluminum shaft, and this guy sees my car. I'm driving my 62 MGA, and he goes, "Oh, dude, like, what year is that?" And I said 62, and he said, "I got a 72." And I said, "What's your name?" And didn't ring a bell. And then he says, "Yeah, I bought it from a guy who bought it from a guy who had it all restored out at that place in Ada." I said, "Yep, all right, that's me." But since I don't carry any business cards, I couldn't give it to him and ask him to call me or give me the VIN or something or other so I could chase it and see whose car it was.
Yeah.
So we got a couple more minutes here. Oh, here we already got some questions. Oh my gosh. Yep. We got we got lots of stuff coming in. So
I'm going to see if I recognize anything.
So is Crystal really spelled with a 7? Or is that a typo, Crystal?
That was a typo.
Oh, all right. Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
I could be related to 007, so I don't know.
Here's the problem with our hobby. You see anybody here that's younger than like?
No, but they can hear you.
You know, we've had that young guy on, you know, for the last two sessions. He was 17, putting a 1275 engine into a 1500 midget. I can think of a better use of time, but hey, you know, that's his deal. And he's 17. It's like, dude, go for it, you know, go for it. Give me your address. I'll send you $50 to help you along, you know. It's like anything to get younger people in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got one more minute and then we'll start off officially. So it looks like we got 68 people on so far. So last month we had it was last month, but we had 180. You know, that's pretty intense. So and I have some questions that have come in beforehand, and people say, "Oh, I can't be at the meeting," or I can't be on the Zoom session. All right, here it is, 7 o'clock. Here we go. Welcome to the 8th. I think it's the 8th. That makes this the octagonal Zoom session. So something else to do during COVID. What's the D in COVID stand for? Disease. It's CO is coronavirus. VI is virus. D is disease. So anyway, during condition. See
it's the condition of having the disease.
See what condition my condition is in? So anyway, so that's, so during COVID, this is what we get to do. And it's like, you know, our local club is toying with the idea of having, now I usually have something up here where I can mute everybody, but I don't see that here. So you got to mute yourself, please, because I don't know how to mute everybody, so we don't get barking dogs and somebody complaining about how much money they're spending on their car. So anyway, It's 90 in sunny Grand Rapids. Oh my gosh. But at 90 miles an hour, well, no, I wasn't going 90. That's a gross exaggeration. I was doing 80 today in my MGA because I got a 3.9 diff in it, and I was running at 5 grand. So that's really cooking. That's moving down the expressway. It was still hot. It was still hot. I said that I'd say a few words tonight, first of all, about bearings. So bearings are what protects the crankshaft from the connecting rods and from the block. So the bearings are inserts. They snap into place. They're sized so precisely that the clearance between the main bearing and the crank is like 1 to 2 thousandths of an inch. That's either a blonde or an RCH hair. And the rod bearing is like 1 to 3 thousandths. It's a little bit more, but there's not much clearance there at all. Modern vehicles have even tighter clearances where they measure the stuff down to a millionth of an inch, and that's why they can use 0.5 oil. But with us, we have to use thicker oil because the age of our engines and how well they're built. So the oil protects the bearing from the crankshaft, or the crankshaft from the bearing. So that picture that I put up, at least on my constant contact picture, shows bearings that are just perfectly worn. Oh my gosh! When you see that, you pull them out. The top half of the rod bearings are all coppered because all the lead indium has been worn away, and then the main bearings alternately they show some copper here and there because that's been worn away. But as long as the crankshaft does not have a ridge on it, and I mean you move your fingernail across the crankshaft, as long as you can't feel a ridge, crank's good to go. And you can just go ahead and replace the bearings. So we used to do that as a preventive measure, somewhere but maybe between 75 and 100,000 miles. You'd have to talk the owner into it. It was a couple-hour project to get the sump off, change the 4 rod bearings, 3 of the 5 main bearings. There are 2 at the very end of the crank that you can't pull out without taking the whole engine apart. So you just change the center 3 and the oil pump, and you can get another 30, 40,000 miles out of that engine just doing that. It's a nice, easy thing to do. You can get the sump off on all these cars without jacking the engine up. I had my sump off on my MGA 3 times. Well, I guess twice. Once I took it off and then I put all the bearings in and I put different pistons in and stuff and put that all back together. And then because I used a real early MGA oil filter, I put it in upside down. So it was sucking a lot of air along with some oil. And so I had to take the sump back off and flip the filter, the pickup right side up and put it back on. But I did that without ever lifting the engine off its mounts in my 62 MGA. So a later model car like a 74.5 through 80, it's a dream compared to the earlier cars. So you can do it. You got to take it apart first to see what size the bearings are. And then it's frustrating because you got to buy the main bearing kit, and that's $80 or something or other. It's got the 5 main bearings in it, but you're only using 3 of them. It's like you're getting cheated, but that's just the way it goes. So you do that, and then the oil pump, and hey, you can get a lot more distance on it. But if you can feel a ridge in the crank, game's up. You got to take the engine apart and get the crankshaft turned. So the difference in those 2 jobs is maybe, I don't know, six if you have it done commercially, if somebody will do it for you, maybe $700 versus $5,000. So I mean, it's well worth it, for a preventive measure and so forth. I've got some questions here. Let me go through those. Jeff Fields wrote from Grafton, Ohio, 44044. about what kind of springs to use on his rebushed H2 carburetors. Well, normally they're just the rotary springs that go there that snap it off. The question is, how tight do you get the rotary springs? And I usually take them up until it just starts to, you feel tension, and then turn it a quarter turn more. I don't know what Joe Curto does, but that's what I do, and that seems to work out okay. Then you got to have a throttle return spring, which on a T-type is a very long, lightweight spring. The MGA is a very heavy-duty spring. I don't think it has to be quite that stiff, but I've never tried and experimented with anything else. So that's Jeff's answer. These meetings are recorded. I do have a couple of them up. One's got maybe 2,000 views. The other one's got 2,000 views, and the other one's only got 600 or 800 views. But they are up. I can't believe anybody really watches an hour and a half or 2 hours of me talking here. But it isn't just me. You guys get to talk too. But it seems like it'd be pretty boring. That's why I made most of those videos are like 5 to 7 minutes, but that used to be the file size that YouTube would take also. So I've got another one from Gary Greenspoon from British Columbia. He's asking about the frequency of oil changes in the differential, the gearbox, the engine, and I'd say every 12,000 miles, every 5 years or every 12,000 miles. So it's straightforward. The engine is at least annually before you put it up to store it, and then at 2,500 or 3,000 mile increments after that. The differential and the rack and pinion and the carburetors take 90 weight gear oil, GL4, not GL5, GL4 90 weight gear oil. The engine and the gearbox take engine oil. The engine, you want to spend the extra money and get good oil with a ZDDP in it, 1,200 parts per million. Valvoline VR1 is a good oil. In the gearbox, you don't need the VR1 because you don't need the zinc because there isn't that kind of pressure with the helical gears in there. So that's oh, and then he also asks, how many grease nipples are there? Well, there's 3 on each side on the kingpins. And then there might be one on the handbrake cable. It depends on the year of the car. There's one on the slip joint of the drive shaft. There might be a grease zerk that you can get to unless someone's installed it incorrectly or someone's installed the non-grease zerk ones on the U-joints in the drive shaft. That's it. But there's no substitute for oiling and greasing so many components of the car. And you can find that list on my website, universitymotorsltd.com. And you go over to forms. I think it says forms. It says Mgb Complete Lubrication. And it's like oiling the door strikers and oiling the top bows and oiling up the bonnet release cable and servicing the battery and exercising the handbrake cable. And it's an all day lubrication. But you do that once every 5 years, once every 12,000 miles. Grease the front wheel bearings, fill up the front shocks, fill up the rear shocks. You know, the chance of you having a problem on the road is greatly reduced. Cleaning the battery, cleaning the fuse box, stuff like that. So, and also while you're there on my website, University Motors Ltd, you can press that PayPal button. I thank everyone who's done that so far. I should read everyone's name. I should send everybody a thank you note. They're stacked up. I'm waiting for that day when I don't know, when it's raining and I can come in here and I can actually work and do that. For Mike Dowie, he's got an 80 Mgb and he's got too much pedal travel on his brake master cylinder. It's like he's changed the master cylinder, he's changed the servo. It's like, why is there all this extra movement? And I can mute everybody, but I don't know how to mute everybody. I often have that on here, but I don't know how to do that. So who's ever got the barking dog, or if you're living next door to them, you can walk over and say, hey, how about that barking dog? Anyway, Mike Dowie's asking about, what could be going on. So the first thing I'd say is make sure that the rear brakes are adjusted, because those shoes move out a lot, and adjusting the rear brakes is unadjusting the handbrake cable, taking the adjuster on the rear brakes, Mgb, and it's a 1/4 inch square, running it all the way out, greasing the threads, running it all the way in until it stops, so you can't turn it anymore. Don't break it off. And then backing it off 1/4 turn by 1/4 turn until the drum just runs free. Then adjust the handbrake cable. So it's an involved process, but that might be one way. Another thing is the distance that the push rod sticks out of the master cylinder, and it should be 0.470 inches. You go into your workshop manual, your Mgb workshop manual, it'll tell you exactly what that distance is. And it might be that distance is funky on your car, and that's why it's not working. So those are a couple of things to Mike. Just a second here, I'll get through these, and we'll get over to the other ones here. And this is Stefan, who's writing from Paris. He's asking about a ground-up restoration on an MGA. That is a huge, huge project. And he's talking about removing the body from the chassis. So those of us with MGAs who've done a restoration know that you have to go out and buy two 5-foot, 4-foot, 5-foot pieces of conduit and that same length of threaded rod. So once the cockpit rail comes off, I wish everybody could shoot themselves. And I just don't know if someone knows how I can go on here. Unmute yourself and tell me. I'm all ears. Anyway, you put this threaded rod through the back, from the back of the car up to the front. You put the conduit around the threaded rod, put shims, washers, so that it fits nicely, and then tighten up nuts on either end of it. So when you pick the body up off the chassis, it doesn't fold upwards. Those rods hold it. So that's an important thing. We could talk for 2 hours about how to restore an MGA, but that's it. So I had another guy, Tom Lestrange, write to me, and he says, I've got my engine apart, and there's these funny nicks between the 1 and 2 lobes on my camshaft. And there was one nick on one side and one on the other. And the connecting rod in a B-series engine runs a hair's breadth from the camshaft. So if anything goes wrong with the rod, like the bearing fails, then the rod hits the camshaft. And that's what you hear when you hear when the engine starts to fail and you lose a rod bearing, and you get this terrible, terrible clatter. It isn't often the bearing that's making the noise, it's the rod hitting the cam. And it'll nick it up on both sides. We've seen cams that are absolutely bent from when the rod comes loose, but that's what causes that nick on there. So I'm going to start here at the top, and Skip Karekis, if you want to unmute yourself and come on, if you're on, we'll talk about your sending unit and your 63B and how to stop the leaking.
Okay, I'm on.
Skip, you're on now. Okay. So you got a 63B?
Right.
Okay. And
I went talked to some people, and they said that I should use the upgraded gasket, the neoprene, which I did, and to just seal the screw heads. And it was good for about a month, and then it started leaking. So I heard that you have a special way of doing it and a special sealant, and so that's what I was looking for.
It's not so much special as old-fashioned. So throw away, it's probably it's probably Viton by now, because neoprene gets, whoops, sorry, too excited here. Neoprene, we put a gasket on, I don't know, 20 years ago on a guy's car. Used the new, I mean, of course, a rubber gasket just makes all the sense in the world, of course. So he gets home a couple hours away, the gasket's grown about that big, and the entire contents of his gas tank is dripping onto his garage floor. He was distressed. I was distressed, you know, because we bought the gasket in good faith. So anyway, buy the quart gasket.
Okay.
Quart gasket and get Permatex #2. It used to be called #2 Aviation compound,
Okay.
but now it's just #2. And it's kind of gold brownish color, goopy.
Okay.
You get it on your hands, you won't get it off for a day or two. It just doesn't come off. It's just goopy. And just goop the shit out of the gasket. And I don't know if it hurts the gasoline, so I'm not sure I'd put it on the tank, but for fear of it sliding it down on the inside, you can sure put it on the sending unit, and then goop each one of those 4 or 5 BA screws, and put those in and just tighten it up, and that'll do it. It'll be fine.
Okay. All right, that's great.
Yep. Permatex #2.
John,
So, okay, now you can.
John, I got
Thank
a
you, John.
question.
So we got some background noise. I would mute everybody if I knew how to do it.
John,
Yes.
can you hear me? It's Mary Vesic, Visek. He's looking at me now. He's unmuted.
Okay. Oh yeah, Mary. Yep.
Mute yourself, please.
So I usually mute everybody, but I'm not sure how to do that. And I'm
So John, here's how you can mute everybody. Go to participants down at the bottom,
yes, sir.
and then there should be a button for mute all.
Everybody is muted. I knew it's just, you know, an old dog here. So, but that's why I've got these nice answers for these old-fashioned questions. So anyway, all right, now we got Jan Gill. You can come on here. He's got a 54 TF, and with a vapor lock issue. If you're on, Jan, you can unmute yourself. I think I've done this correctly. That you can unmute yourself.
Yep, it works. Yep.
Hey, it works. All right. Okay. So your car in warm weather, you say 85 degrees Fahrenheit or so. After a little bit, it just isn't running. So
It sputters a lot.
okay. All right. So is your TF got the fuel pump back by the tank, or has it got it
Yes.
up underneath the? All right. So that's a push pump. And you're not getting vapor lock. I mean, that technically you're not getting vapor lock, but the problem you're having is that the fuel is boiling. So are you concerned at all with it? Do you pay attention to the kind of fuel that you get, or do you fiddle around with that? You can buy gasoline that is non-alcohol gasoline. I mean, if it's 30 miles from home, it's kind of, you know, it's a hassle. I don't know. But if you can find non-ethanol gas close to you, use that. And I think usually the higher the octane, the less trouble you have. The problem you've got is the gasoline's boiling. Now it might be the coil. I mean, might be a lot of things. But after 15 minutes, the whole engine's all warmed up and everything's going on. So it's either the coil, or you're not putting out enough spark, or it's the fuel boiling. And I talked to a guy today. He goes, "Oh my gosh, I turned my," what did he have? I can't remember. But he turned the car off, go back to it in 10 minutes, there's a beep. And it won't start. It just won't start. He waits 20 minutes, it starts up just fine. It's because the gasoline boils, and it's because of the alcohol in the gasoline. And there really isn't any way out of it except to look and see if you can possibly find out if all the different grades of gasoline you buy at the pump have got alcohol in them. Sometimes the high grade does not have alcohol in it.
Yeah.
So.
I know there's a place in England that sells heat shields for carburetors, Is that worth doing?
Sure. I mean, it isn't going to hurt. Brown and Gammon sells those.
Yeah.
And you can put that on because what's causing the gasoline to boil in the float bowls is,
Yeah.
you got conduction, convection, and radiation. And there's no conduction, but you've got convection, the heat off the radiator and so forth, and you certainly have the radiation off the exhaust manifold. So sure, you can do that, and that may, you go for it, and just.
John,
Yes.
I had the same problem with that, with the boiling.
Okay.
And I talked to a person on the experience. And the way I fixed it was I would, after the car was shut, I would depress the gas pump once. Then I would depress the gas pump a second time.
The gas
and
pump. You mean the throttle? You mean
Yes, exactly.
Okay, all right.
I would press it once to the floor, let it go, put it down to the floor again, and then start cranking and slowly let it up, and it always started in the hot weather.
Okay.
It's not starting so much I have a problem with. It's keeping it running, especially in the lower gears.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
John?
So it could be Tony.
Yeah, John or Joe Kudo sells koozies for the
Yeah,
float
you
bowls.
can get these well, they're not asbestos, but they're asbestos look-alike little socks that fit up on your float bowls, and you can put a zip tie around them. So Tony just had some lower front suspension done. So how'd your knee replacement go?
Good, it went very well. Sorry to cut you off, but I was in the pre-op room when you called.
No, that's all right. Sorry. Okay. Well, those are some hints about how to start working on it, starting it slow. I also know that if you get out of the car and lift and angle the dampers, lift the air pistons and hit the starter. Now all of a sudden you need 3 hands. That'll work too, but that's kind of a hassle. So.
Say, Tony, could you repeat the name of the source for those socks?
Joe Curto, Curto. Joe Curto is the carburetor king in Queens, New York. College Point. I've been there. So, all right, here we go.
Thank
you.
If you have a child, it makes it easier because they have small hands to get in there and get the thing wrapped around and get it sealed right.
Okay. All right. Okie doke. So now we got RMB to everyone. I've got a 62 Mark II engine that was recently rebuilt using a Pinion head gasket, the original head bolts and new hardened nuts and washers. My engine now has 500 miles on it, and I need to retorque the head. While I oiled the bottom threads of the head bolts, he means studs, I did not oil the top threads. On the web, I've read that the retorque hot, cold, loose, and then, okay, so we're asking about what technique to use after 500 miles. And what I would do, if you didn't oil the threads to begin with, is I would take one nut loose at a time in the sequence that's shown, which is a spiral out, all 11 nuts. Take one loose, oil it up, pull it down to 55, take the next one loose, oil it. Why would you have to oil it? It's holding the rocker shaft, because you just do the same thing to everyone. Oil it, pull it down to 55. I use a torque, click torque, and 55 is right at the limit of how tight you want to get these things. You don't want to get any tighter than that. You could stop at 50, but I always go 55, and it's rare that you break an original stud. Replacement studs, or if you got ARB, I know they'll take 2,000 pounds or something, but there were some studs in the marketplace from our favorite Southeast Asian country that snapped at 30 pounds. So you don't have those. Well, you said you had the original ones, but I'd go about 55 pounds, and then reset your valves. If you bought a cam that requires like 18 and 20 inlet and exhaust, set it up that way, otherwise set it at 15. I just put my engine back together on my Mark II, and I ran it for 500 miles with the valves at 35 thousandths, so everything had a chance to spin and seat and so forth. And then I torqued it down, and I left the valves at 18 or 19, so that it's a little clattery, but better too loose than too tight. So hope that helps.
And do you do it hot or cold?
I do it hot. I do it hot. I mean, I'm not sure it makes any difference, but almost always you're doing it as part of a tune-up, and you come in after a run, and it's hot. So
okay.
So
all right, thank you.
Absolutely. MGB Jim Perrell, MGB or MGC, driven several miles, then dies when it comes to a stop. It says SUs, meaning it's got SU carburetors on it that hasn't got a Weber on it. So there is I just talked to a guy a week or two ago who'd been struggling to this for 4 years. He'd come off the expressway, carb kill, start right back up, run great, run. So anyway, he talked to me a couple of times about it, and we were going through it. Then he talked to Joe Curto, and Curto says, well, how about the vent holes on top of the carburetors? You got vent holes? Surprise, he had no vent holes, and they weren't internally vented like the very early MGA carburetors are, the dustless carburetors. And the guy drilled these little tiny breather holes in there, solved it right there. Another thing that can happen is you can have a vacuum leak. And if any kind of vacuum leak can come in off a high-speed run, your manifold vacuum is just enormous, and it pulls in all this extra fresh air, leans out the mixture, car kills, starts right back up again as though there was nothing wrong with it. So, Jim, are you on?
Yeah, John, you know what, I was wondering if it could be part of his brake servo on this MGC. It seems to me that it only happens when it's heated up, and I'm wondering if he's got an expansion in the vacuum or maybe an internal vacuum leak on that servo. I don't have the car here in front of me to check it, but
well,
that's what I would suspect.
Take a pair of vice grips and crush the hose.
Yeah.
Go out and drive it and see, but don't drive it where there's any traffic, because you need a leg that big to stop an MGC without servos. Oh my gosh. On MGB, an 80 MGB with a faulty servo, you can still stop that. That's not so horrible, but an MGC is like impossible. So.
Yeah, I suggested that to him, and I don't know if that's the case. When I had it in my shop, I went through everything, and we couldn't find any vacuum leaks on it, and the thing was running great until he took off and ran about 35 miles with it, and it died when he got off the freeway. So I've got to believe it. I think it's vacuum. I don't know. It's got the original setup for the carbs on there. I didn't look at any vent holes up on there. When the vent holes you're talking about, you're not talking on the top of the piston. You're talking on the.
I'm talking about on the AUC 8114 dampers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in the top there. So sometimes people buy the Rob Clark, those cool little octagonal MG ones, and put those on and don't drill a hole in them. So that could be a problem. It just usually it's a vacuum leak, but anyway, so okay. So Mike Ellsworth is weighing in from Australia. My grandfather told a joke frequently about World War II. The guy had been evacuated from Port Moresby down to Australia, and he was really the soldier, and he's really in tough shape. And he woke up in a hospital ward, and he looked at the nurse, and he said, "Did they bring me here to die?" And she said, "No, they brought you here yesterday." So anyway, okay, that's my Australian joke.
That's pretty cruel, John.
Well, a World War II joke, So, all right, now here we go from John Dykeis. How do you know when the rear spring shackle nuts are tight enough, given that the spring pad buffers are rubber and squish? Good question. Good question. I tighten them up until they begin to squish. Okay. I mean, it's not very, it doesn't sound scientific. And it's like, we'll torque it to 35 pounds and then another 28 degrees. Sorry, I can't give you anything like that. I tighten it up until they begin to deform. The red ones that come with the red bushing kits, those don't deform. So those things, all of a sudden the torque gets real great. But I just thought, if you know if they're too loose, because you get torque steering. What's torque steering? Torque steering is like driving a high-low. So you put the steering wheel straight ahead. At all midgets torque steer. All midgets torque steer. So anyway, you put the steering wheel straight ahead, and instead of grabbing the wheel like this, put your hands on the wheel so you don't turn the wheel. And you're in second gear and you're doing 30 miles an hour and you just jam the throttle to the floor, so there's a lot of torque, and the car veers off in one direction, you let off on the gas, and it veers off on the other direction. That's because the rear axle is turning this. If you're looking down on it, I can't show it like this, but it's turning at the rear end and driving the car. And you can, I mean, when they're loose, you can change lanes, and you don't notice it when you're driving because there's a little twitch and you correct for it. So anyway, if you've left them too loose, it'll torque steer. So I just go for the slight disruption.
Well, John, I've noticed that years ago, I would get a really loud clunk from the rear of the car, and tightening up the nuts on the shackles made that clunk go away.
No kidding. Holy moly.
Yeah.
That must have been pretty loose on both sides, because the whole axle then was rolling.
I don't know. It sounded like somebody in the trunk of the MGB was hitting it with a hammer.
We had a TF that came in like that one time, and it's just unbelievable. And when the thing's up in the air, you could take the front of the nose from the differential and just up and down. It just wobbled all over, and it didn't torque steer. So anyway, just till they start to deform, John, I think that's a good thing. Okay, so now we have an acronym, Pret Lodge, with a 75 Mgb, PRETLOJ. Maybe it's a combination of two people's names. Anyway, he says, or she says, and you can unmute yourself if you'd like.
It's a he. It's me.
Oh, all right, okay. I got a 75B, and the manual says leaded fuel only. Well, there is no leaded fuel, so you don't have any choice. So you just use regular fuel. And you're not doing any damage, or not much. But when you do damage, eventually an exhaust valve will burn. Someday, maybe that's already happened.
Yeah.
And then when you take the head off and you take it to the machine shop, they put in hardened seats, because that's what's failed. It isn't the valve, it's the seat. And that takes care of it. When you do head work on the MGB, on all the cars, don't use the manganese bronze, those gold colored valve guides. We thought that was the cat's meow. We thought that was the answer to all our problems with the lack of lead in the gasoline, but it turns out they swell so much. They'll grab and gall the valve stem, jam the valve open. They're just awful. Just cast iron guides are just great. So you're doing no damage. Don't buy anything to pour in the tank. Spend money on your girlfriend or your wife or something instead. That stuff's all just snake oil. So just keep driving. Just keep enjoying it.
If it ever stops raining, I'll enjoy it. But thank you.
Where are you? South Carolina?
No, we're in New York.
Oh, okay.
Westchester County.
Okay, I talked to a guy from South Carolina today that complained. So it's 90 here, not a cloud in the sky. So.
Every day at 4 o'clock it rains, and I hate putting my top up. My top is it's been down for almost a year now, which I'm probably damaging the top. But when I drive every day at 4 o'clock, we get a torrential downpour, and so I just don't drive the car much now.
Well, at 50 miles an hour, most of that goes right over the top of you. Yeah. I've never been so wet as I was in my MGA during a downpour once on I was on I-80, as a matter of fact. No, it goes to New York. I must have been on 70 to the top of Pennsylvania. So, okay, let's see. Larry Maselli, you were, well, here we go with the guilt, with a guilt thing. You were going to post instructions on how to make a Protronics work on a 67B. Can you post those instructions on your Facebook page or website? I will do my very best to do that. But a 67B is a positive ground car. The easiest thing is to move it over to negative earth, but now the tack isn't going to work. So in that case, you've got to buy a positive ground Protronics and wire it up the way they tell you to. But then the tack doesn't work, and that must be what Larry was asking.
No, John, the car has been converted to negative ground with an alternator.
Okay.
I still have the original tack in it that was working when I had points in it, but then I've gone to the Petronics for a lot of reasons,
right.
and I just have a very erratic tack.
Yep, I'll Facebook is the easiest way.
Hey, John.
67 tack, yes.
I just put a Petronics in my 67.
Okay.
And the people at Neisinger, when they rebuilt my tachometer, rewired the tachometer for the Petronics.
So you have a single lead into the back of it.
Got positive ground, and everything works perfectly.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, they switched the guts, but I'm guessing that Larry's got the original tack. So with a
yes, it's the original tack
with the impulse loop. So okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll put that up on Facebook.
Thank you, John.
The impulse loop comes out.
Okay, so now we got from Kevin O to everyone. Kevin has a 74.5 Mgb. That means it's got the rubber bumpers, very few of those. He's got a front end shimmy at 50 miles an hour. Everything's balanced. Overinflating the tires to 40 pounds seems to help a little. Okay, well, the reason that the car shakes at any speed is because of an imbalance in the tires, right? There are only 5 things that turn when you're driving down the road. That's 4 wheels and a drive shaft. Otherwise, it's just like sitting in your driveway and revving the thing up to $3,000 and just sitting there. So it has to do with the front wheels. Now, if the front wheel bearings are not well adjusted, and the front nut should be at about 60 pounds using the shims in there. I got a YouTube video up about that. That's a dicey thing to do, especially with wire wheels. Oh my gosh, takes forever to get sorted out. But if the bearings are too loose up in front, you can end up with some wobble that is hard to get rid of. The rest of the system, the shocks, if the shocks are good, you bounce the car and you bounce down and the car comes back up. If you got a bad shock, you can get it bouncing, let go, and it'll bounce another couple of times. And if you got a bad shock, you cannot get rid of vibration. The wheel has to be round. Sounds stupid, but a lot of our cars, they got older tires on them. And if you
have a car from the Island of Misfit Toys.
If you put your hand on the outside of the wheel and spin it and feel, if you can feel any vagaries in the outside in the tread, that's too much, right? Because you can't balance out a lump. If there's chopping on the inside from having bad toe in from years ago, or bad chopping on it, scooping from having a bad shock or something, or even out of balance. So if you got wire wheels, you can send them to Alan Hendricks in Charlotte, North Carolina, Hendrix wire wheel, and he puts them on his machine. He's got a razor, and the wheel's going around, and he runs the razor back and forth. Now the wheel is round. Even new tires aren't round. I mean, how round are they? Within what? 1,000th, 100,000th, 100,000th. I mean, you know, how round is a tire? But he makes them really round, concentric with a center. He does not do that with disc wheels, which is too bad. So if you look at the wheel, if you spin the wheel and just look at the front of it, you can see if it's doing this. If you spin it from the side, around and around, you can see if it's doing this, and none of that. You can put 200 pounds of lead on the rim. You can't get rid of that. So it has to do with the wheel bearings, the shock, and then the condition of the tire. So that's about all that I can tell you. So, Kevin, do you have disc wheels or wire wheels? You can.
They are disc wheels, John.
Oh yeah, okay. So
what the shimmy tends to go away at about 65, or get much better at about 65. Which one would?
It's a harmonic. You know, it's a harmonic that you pick up, and my MGA starts shaking around 80 pretty bad, but it doesn't shake until you get up to about 70. So I all things being equal, but I just made a fixture because I got twin cam wheels on my A. Just made a fixture so I can get the thing balanced better. So it just has to, you have to do a lot of inspection yourself, and just look at it. And if you can see something wrong with the tire. How old are the tires, Kevin?
The tires are probably about 12 years old, but it started right when they were brand new, though. It happened even then.
Right. Well, the camshaft guys tell you that if one lobe is worn more than 10 thousandths from another, it's time to buy a new cam. But their goal is to sell cams, and the tire people are now telling us that once your tires are 10 years old, you should buy new tires for safety. That may be a little pushing it, but anyway. But that's it. There's other ways you can put the wheel on a balancing machine and put a dial indicator on the rim, and sometimes somebody's had it on a tire changing machine, and they've buggered up the rim, and now the rim isn't square with the center. It's like that. So when the car's driving, it's always doing that. There's 100 possibilities here. So anyway, those are some of them. So.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we're down to Lou Bala, and all about my son. That's very kind. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was I sent that out. That was such a nice article in the Washington Post about that. And I mean, there's 20. They tell you that it was a big deal until COVID came along. That 22 veterans a day were committing suicide, and I don't know, guys my age, it never really said how do they know and all that kind of stuff. But when they're young, when they're 27 years old, and there's 4 or 5 of them out of the same platoon, something's really wrong. So anyway, thank you. There were GoFundMe pages to help out with that, but if you'll just remember my son in your thoughts and prayers, and make a contribution to somebody who claims that they're helping with PTSD. It's a real difficult thing. All the guys in this platoon, you read the article, some of you read the article, they've all had guns in their mouths. It's just, it's really frightening, and most of them talk themselves down or call somebody and do that. But rather than send something here to my son, his widow's well taken care of, find somebody else out there. There's a group called TAPS, TAPS. They deal with that exclusively, and that's a real nice program. So, okay. Anyway, thank you very much, Kevin, Jacques. To everyone, I'm having issues trying to get my 71B to idle below $2,000. Oh, it's easy. Good. good. We got an easy one here. Idle screws are all the way out. Timing set. There's no vacuum leaks that he can find. It's a fresh rebuild. Where can you start? Okay, so first of all, it's external mechanical, and that is the fingers. You know, the fingers on the interconnect. Kevin, you can come online if you want and weigh in a little bit. But the fingers that stick into the carburetors from the interconnecting shaft that's operated by the throttle cable, you want to make sure those are loose. Those are 2BA. If anyone's got British wrenches, but a 5/16 seems to work just fine. You can loosen those up and make sure you got play there. You've got the idle screws up on top. You got the fast idle screws down on the bottom. Those can be buggered up sometimes, or one of the cams can be part way on. If it's not that, then it's inside the carburetor. Oh, great, you get to take it off, take them off. That's why you only use grease on carburetor gaskets. You can take them on and off 100 times if you have to. So now you got to take the carburetor off and take a look at the throttle disc and back the idle screw all the way off and turn the throttle disc all the way closed and look through it. Can you see light? Can you see a rim of light around the outside? You can always see a little tiny bit, but compared to the other one, can you? So then there's a spring-loaded overrun valve that's put on all the discs from 68 through 80 that it's designed to pull open during periods of high manifold depression, which means when you're slowing the car down. Doing 60 miles an hour, you take your foot off the gas. The throttle discs close, and there's not enough air fuel that gets into the engine to combust. So the federal government said, can't do that. You have to slow down more slowly. So you do get complete combustion. So you got these little spring-loaded valves. You can either replace the throttle disc in its entirety and get rid of those things, but those throttle discs are $30 a piece or something. MGA ones work, any other earlier MGB ones work, they don't go bad. Or you can solder them up, heat them up from the button side and put solder in by the spring, and that'll solder those things shut. Now no air can come through it. So the last thing is kind of the weirdest thing, and that is if the carburetors have been rebuilt and someone has put the boring bar all the way through the side of the carburetor and it opened it up to 3/8 to put in a 3/8 by 5/16 bushing, and then driven the bushing in, and the bushing hasn't come down and hit the inside diameter of the throat, then air can get around, it can get around the throttle disc because the bushings were installed poorly. So that's it. Vacuum leaks, the fingers, from the interconnecting link, the screws on the outside on the cams for the fast idle. Then we're into the throttle disc being mispositioned, the overrun valve pulling open too easily, and finally the bushings haven't been installed properly. Now you can often tell which carburetor's which if one of them's the guilty party by taking the air cleaners off and taking your suction. You don't have to buy the $30 tool, just buy a 2-foot long piece of 1/2-inch heater hose and put it down and just listen into each throat as it's running at 2,000 RPM. And if one carburetor is shut down and the other one is drafting, you'll hear nothing out of one and a great huge out of the other one. So it'll be real obvious which carburetor is which. So anyway, that's a lot of steps in that, but listen to the hiss first. So anyway, hope that helps you out. Turk.
I did follow a lot of those steps, stepping through everything. I'm actually trying a second set of carbs, which were I got from gentleman's actually on here tonight, Ron, and okay. I had kind of the same issue with my old carbs, which I rebuilt myself, but didn't redo the bushings. I was having a hell of a time getting them set at all. So we're trying these carbs, which are supposedly from a 71, where mine were not. My engine's not from a 71, it's from a 69 or 70. did in German. It's kind of a mess of pieces, it seems. In this.
Engines are all the same. Yeah.
It's been kind of a fight. When I first got it all set up, it was idling just about 1,200, and then it changed up to this 2,000.
Do you have those overrun valves? Do you have those spring-loaded? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like it runs great. Otherwise, I mean, it's just sitting at a light at 2,000 RPM. But I mean, except when I had a valve go loose or a rocker go loose on me and going up to 0.1 clearance and sounding like a big knock in the bottom of the engine at 120 kilometers an hour and getting home. It's been
John. It's Ron. I'm the fellow that sold him the carbs or loaned them to him, and he bought them. But those carbs did not have that problem on my 71. That's why I think there's something else. There's no poppets on the discs.
You know, it's not the tire pressure. It's not the type of oil you're using in the gearbox. It's not the pistons. It's only has to do with airflow. Only has to do with airflow. So somehow air is getting into the engine, and the only way it can get in is from that left-hand side, and it's either between the manifold and the head, the manifold and the heat shield and the spacer blocks and the carburetors. It's really hard to have. I assume your emission control system's off the car.
Yeah, pretty much everything's gone except for the canister for the charcoal.
Okay. It has to be in one of those things. I use spray carburetor cleaner to look for vacuum leaks.
Yeah, I've used carb cleaner. I've used everything.
If you listen to the carburetors with a hose to see which one's drafting more than the other, or
I did use the tool trying to get it set, and even that I can't. They don't seem to adjust enough to get it figured out. So this is where I've been really lost. And the struggle with me, there's no one local to my area that knows. I missed a guy in Saskatoon. It was doing a tuning day, and I was going to drive out there, but that was just after the rocker went funny, and I didn't know what was going on until I figured out and made sure there was no other damage.
You can call me tomorrow if you wish, later in the afternoon. We're on Eastern time here. Must be on Mountain time or something out there, and I can talk to you again about this, and we can go through it step by step again. So
yeah, that's something possible. We're going to try and maybe make a drive to Saskatoon or somewhere that someone knows a little more about these cars, and probably I bet you someone will take 5 minutes and have it figured out.
Yep. That's probably the case, but it's like, oh my gosh, so. Okay, well, good luck. You can call me if you wish. So our next one up here is from Turk. So Turk, you can come on. And,
I'm here.
Okay, and you got a rebuilt gearbox with less than 2,000 miles. Here's a mystery for you to think about. There's a clattering suddenly coming from under my car. Not all the time, but when it is, there's a serious clatter. If I touch the clutch pedal, it goes away. It started happening at precisely the same time that my second gear synchronizer went away. So you can't. Your second gear synchro doesn't work.
Correct.
Okay, so you can change up pretty easily, but it's real hard to change down into second without double clutching and stuff. And if you touch the clutch pedal, it goes away. So anyway,
yeah, don't even have to depress it.
I've got two. You have to depress it or just touch it?
Just touch it, really.
Okay, so there are two
Maybe
things
depress
going
it a
on
little
here.
bit.
There are two things going on. The second gear synchro doesn't work because it was a new one and no one lapped it in with the gear. What's that even mean? You have to lap in the synchros with the gears, when you're doing it, and of course that demands that the whole gearbox comes out, but you're going to have to take the clutch out anyway. So here's a perfect opportunity to do this.
John, everything was apart.
Yeah, well,
The
everything's
entire-
going to have to be apart again.
Oh Lord.
Because,
Yeah.
hey, you know, I'm sorry.
You've heard of this car because Guy St. John is the one that
Okay.
rebuilt,
Okay.
and it's the one that had the leaking oil galleries.
Oh yeah, sure. Yep. I remember him talking about that. So anyway, there's a release bearing, and the release bearing's got a throwout bearing. It's got a steel housing, and then that's heated up and it expands, and they drop this annulus, a donut of carbon, like number 8. You can write on a cardboard box with it, but it's really hard stuff. Drop that into it, and then it when it cools, it grabs that carbon. Well, something's going on, or was going on, maybe for a little while. You're not the only one, and the carbon starts to spin in that housing, makes a hell of a racket. As soon
Are
as
you talking? You're breaking up severely. Are you talking about the throwout bearing?
Yeah, am I breaking up? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean,
No, not
very
for
severely.
everybody.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anyway,
brand new throwout bearing.
Yeah. Well, it was new when you did the job, but just because it's new doesn't mean it's good. So anyway, talk to me tomorrow. I've talked to Guy about your car, and it's real. I know it's really frustrating to have had all this work done and then hear that. But it's not the person who did the job's fault.
Oh no! I don't blame
It doesn't
Guy.
make your pain any less. But you know, some of the parts that come through are they're just not
for any of this
good.
If anybody, it's the transmission shop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can call me tomorrow. I can talk to you just a little bit more about it, or I talk to Guy or something or other. So
John?
Yes.
I had a very similar problem with a racket, and my throwout bearing was eaten up, but it was because cheap pressure plate, the bearing on the pressure plate had come loose. When I pulled it apart, you could take the
thrust plate.
The thrust plate, you could spin it around and put it in an angle and stuff, and so it ate up. I mean, it only had 6,000 miles on it, and it was awful.
You just, and when you look at the part, it comes out of the box, it looks great. I mean, there just isn't. It's so frustrating, and especially if you own a shop, because if you're lucky, you get paid to do that clutch once. I can tell you, you don't get paid to do it twice or thrice. And I've had lots of clutches that we had to do over and over. I had one that we had to do like 4 times because it was faulty. It was faulty parts. It's faulty parts. That's just the way it is. It's frustrating.
Is there a brand
thinking
you can look at?
No.
You're thinking that this is just my throwout bearing.
Well, you haven't got a second gear synchro either, right? I mean, you said your second gear synchro was faulty. So if that's a fact, and if you can hear me, maybe I'm breaking up with you.
Totally breaking up now.
Oh well, call me tomorrow.
Yeah.
Call me tomorrow. Okay.
John, I want to say that I've had an excellent experience with Moss putting out this new Mazda MX-5 gearbox. It's a 5-speed. I put one in a very early B for one of my customers, and I'll say this thing is phenomenal. The ratio on it is extremely close, and it just shifts just like you've got melted butter. I've never felt anything so smooth in a box. So if somebody's having that experience and wants to bite the bullet and to pay the price for a Japanese box, it's a pretty straightforward installation, and it really is a remarkable difference in the shifting on them. And I'm not trying to sell these for Moss, but it did really come out nice.
By the time you're all said and done, what's that, $4,000 or something?
About $4,000, and your labor on top of it. You better figure about $552 somewhere in there.
And as long as you got the engine out, you better look at those bearings, and they're okay.
Yeah, we did all that.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah,
So,
well, I've already got pushing 30,000 in this restoration.
well, it's you know, we had people that would come in and spend 100.
Oh, God.
I had an ex-wife who said, I don't get it. I don't get it. Why would someone spend $100,000 on a car that's only worth $15,000?
Right.
And I said, well, do you know anyone who owns a cat?
Yeah.
What's a cat worth?
Good. Yeah.
So
My
30,000
brother's
is a good
put 50,000 restoring his 66.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
So
yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Anyway.
So now we're going to switch over and go across the pond here to Darren.
Hi, John.
Hey, great. So you've got how critical is fitting an anti-roll bar, anti-sway bar on an MGA, and should it be you're asking, should it be up on top, or can you fit it down in the bottom?
No, I'm fitting it underneath.
Well,
but I'm asking, yeah.
That'll be okay. It's better, I think, to have it up above so that the geometry is like this and it isn't like that. On the other hand, I'm not an engineer, but this probably isn't any different than this. But I wouldn't put a 3/4 bar on it. I think that's way overkill. I mean, an Mgb uses 9/16 and the GT uses 5/8. So, and I got a 9. I don't know what I got on mine. I don't know what I've got on mine, but 3/4 is like monster. You know, like I don't know with that. And you don't need to shorten the links. The Mgb, you can take a whole sway bar assembly right off an Mgb, and just take the whole thing and bolt it right onto your car. What year is your A?
59.
Okay, so you haven't got the scoop in the top of the frame extension, but that's okay because it takes 2 days to get the bumper off and the frame extension off to get the sway bar up on top. So if you mount the sway bar just on the underside of that frame extension, you can just use an Mgb one and use everything from an Mgb.
Yeah, so the problem, John, has been that the links that you get are about 8.5 inches long, and it's common practice to cut them down. But if you get the cut wrong, you end up with them hitting the steering arms on lock.
Well, you know, I've got Mgb ones on my A. Of course, it's mounted on the top. I mounted one on a woman's Mark II above last spring, a year ago spring in Washington, D.C., in Liz's car. And I used Mgb links. She had the little short ones. They're about that long or something, but I didn't like those. I used the B ones. So
yeah,
that's my experience.
Okay, thank you, John.
If I can make a comment, I did that on my 58 MGA, and I had the links shortened because they were interfering with the tie rod ends. And then I just mount the anti-roll bar upside down, and it fit perfectly for the geometry. And it's been like that for 40,000 miles with no issues. It's been really nice.
Interesting. Thank you.
And if you go on MG Experience and ask the question, of course, you get 258 responses.
Yeah.
And then you have to separate the wheat from the chaff. There's a lot of interesting perspectives there. But I use the Mgb links with no problem, and I don't think the suspension's changed from 56 through 62. I mean, the track, everything's all the same. So anyway, that's what I did.
Okay, thanks, John.
Yay! Thanks for listening.
You're welcome.
So, all right, now here's Bill Califoot. and he's installed an MGA dual master cylinder on his 53YB, and the front brakes will not release. So, Bill, are you on?
I am. Hello, John. We've talked about this project a few times. You've helped out
Okay.
other
All right.
stuff.
So, if the front brakes won't release, that's because the pedal, you haven't got enough pedal free play. That would be my first easy solution. You have to have half an inch of pedal free play, tunk, 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 before
I've got that. Would it be good? I was guessing or thinking that it might be the calipers. So I've got disc brakes on there.
Okay, do you have, are you using?
Because it's all, I don't know if you recall, we put a MGB engine in it, trans, and most of the rear end and front end's all MGB.
Are you using silicone fluid? .5?
No, it's the .3.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if they were used calipers, and is that common that the plungers and the calipers will stick or have to be?
No, you can, during our complete lubrication, which I mentioned about before, when you go on my website and press my PayPal button, we, on an MGB, we would take out one pad and then squirt the circumference of the, or put a couple screwdrivers in, have somebody else pump up the master cylinder, push that piston out of the caliper with two screwdrivers in the way, so you can't get it too far out. Squirt the outside diameter of it with, should use brake fluid, but you can use other stuff too, penetrant. And then lever that piston back into the caliper, pump it back out, and we do that 3 times with each caliper. That churned up all this nasty, dirty shit inside the caliper, and then after that you bleed them. But as a rule, the calipers don't freeze. They just don't freeze. The front brake hoses plug up after a period of time.
Yeah, they're new.
And when you take your 7/16 wrench and open the bleeder on that caliper and let out a fingernail full of fluid, do they free up again?
Haven't tried that.
Okay, try that, because if the whole system's pressurizing and you can't get the pressure out of the system, then by opening the bleeder, you let off just a ton. I mean, let me tell you, nails worth of fluid, and then suddenly they're free. If that's going on, then there's some problem getting the fluid back up into the master cylinder. Now there is a valve in the master cylinder that keeps a tiny amount of pressure, 3 pounds or something, 5 pounds, in the brake lines. But the MGB master cylinder uses the same thing. So I don't think that's the problem. And MGAs use the same master cylinder, and they have disc brakes. The same disc brakes that you've got on your car, except without the pin to pull them off. So try that. Pump it up.
I'll try lubing up the pistons on the calipers and see if that.
Yeah.
Those are old calipers, so they could just be from sitting.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Just pump out one at a time, and then get fluid out. Lever it back in, pump it out again, lever it back in, and that'll free it up, churn up all the stuff on the inside. So.
Okay, sounds great. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Okie doke. All right, from Frank. Frank, he's got a question about a 76 MGB, I think. And he's got a question about the transmission fluid, transmission oil, on his 76B. So Frank, you can come on if you're there.
Yeah, here, John.
Okay.
Hey, first of all, thanks for doing these. These are great.
Oh, hey, well, you're okay.
They really are. I'm sure I speak for everybody. We really appreciate this.
Go to my website and press that PayPal button.
You got it.
Anyway,
You got it.
You can tell I enjoy doing it. You know.
I think you do. I think you do. So I got this 76 last year. It's my second B. And I said, oh, what kind of transmission fluid? And it says use 2050 gear oil. I mean, engine oil.
Yeah.
But because we have so many synthetics and stuff available now, What would you use? Would you just use a simple 2050 in there? Say the heck
I
with it,
use
or-
2050. John Esposito that runs Quantum Mechanics says, "Oh my God, you've got to use 30 weight non-detergent."
30 weight non. Yep. I had a Triumph, and he said use 30 weight, and it worked great.
And other people say, "Oh my God, use AMSOIL. You don't have to shift it anymore. It never gets hot." And hey, there's all kinds of claims out there. I've never done a series of experiments, and then gone out and driven the car for 100 miles and said, "How does it feel now?" I just use engine oil. That's what I use.
It's it's funny when I talked to John a couple of years ago. I had a Triumph with an overdrive, and he said, "Well, I can sell you this red line for $30 a quart, or you can spend $6 a quart on the 30 straight weight non-detergent. What do you want to do?" And I said, "Okay, I'm getting the picture here."
Yeah, from Napa.
It worked great, but I looked in the book, and the book is 44 years old, and I said, should we be using some of the red line stuff? And apparently the answer is no.
I have people call me and tell me, "Oh my God, you got to use this stuff. It's just the coolest thing since sliced bread." And I never have. I've always just gone with a simple, just cheap stuff.
Yeah.
So out of MGB gearboxes, we pulled automatic transmission fluid. We pulled 90 weight, and any oil is better than no oil. I'll tell you that.
Right.
So,
well, thanks very much.
Hey, thank you. Okay, from Kedwards, K.E. Edwards, or K. Edwards. You can come on if you want. So he says, pushing the light switch turns my headlights on my 59 MGA. Pushing the light switch. That seems reversed. Well, it seems reversed to me too. It seems, yeah. So where's the switch from?
Well, it's the switch that came with the car, and so it's when it's pulled. So I'm easily hitting that and turning the lights on during the day because it pushing in turns them on. So it's weird. I don't understand. It's the original switch as far as I know in the car. And it's not moving much at all. The switch is just barely moving.
This is parking, and then it slides. This is off. I don't know, off, parking, and headlights. And I don't if you put the power up here, you put the power on S2 instead of A, then when you pushed it in, so yeah, the connections are wrong. So rather than crawl underneath the dash, you're going to have to just a little bit anyway. Take a punch and go up in the bottom of the switch, or a little tiny awl or something or other. Pull the knob off, and then you got to get the nut off there, and you can use a screwdriver and a little tiny hammer. What year's your car?
59.
Painted dash?
This one has upholstery on it.
Yeah, well, as soon as you use the screwdriver and the hammer trick, the screwdriver is going to hop off and put a hole in the upholstery. So you got to be like really, really careful.
Okay.
But spin that nut off, pull the switch out, and now at least you've got a little better control down underneath the car. And there's the terminals are labeled A, S1, and S2. A gets the brown with blue. That's your power.
Okay.
Blue. S1 gets red.
Okay.
And S2 gets blue. Who else can you call who can pull the stuff out of their head like this? So anyway, yeah, that's it. So
well, I won't remember it after I lose my notes. So
I would just always call me. That's a good one though. That's good. I had a guy one time who said my MGA won't go anywhere until I press down on the clutch, and then it'll go. It's like, oh my God, what is that? And so I thought about it and I couldn't come up with an answer. And I said, well, can you drive it down here? And he goes, yeah, sure. So he drove it down, and the push rod on the master cylinder was adjusted so far that the clutch was released just by the position of the push rod. So when you pressed on the clutch, it mashed the 3 fingers of the pressure plate into the clutch disc. Because if he told me that he's getting some noise, it might have been a clue. But anyway, he'd push the pedal down and go, ow, as the whole thing would grind together. So yeah, it's funny when stuff runs backwards. Oh my gosh.
So you're just saying the wires are probably, somebody reversed them somewhere along the way.
That's all. That's all. Somebody rewired it, doing after they put the upholstery on the dash. And
so there's 3 positions on the light switch. Is that what you said?
2 positions on the light switch. 2 positions on the switch. First position connects the power to S1, switch 1, and the second position on the switch, S1 and S2 are live.
Okay.
So that's why A is your power, and that's a brown with a blue tracer. It comes off the A1 terminal on the control box.
Okay.
So,
all right.
If you forget, you lose the note, the cat, the dog ate your homework, then call me and I'll tell you again.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Here we got Larry Esslinger. Larry can come on now if Larry wants. We're going to talk about a 77 Mg midget, although we've already talked about this problem. Anyway, if Larry's here, you can unmute yourself. But,
yep, here.
Okay, so anyway, Larry, you've got a midget, and when you accelerate, it veers to the left, changes lanes, and when you let off, it goes back into the other lane.
It's all that new horsepower I put in it.
So that's because the rear axle's loose on the leaf springs. These folks don't have time. And when you go to tighten up the U-bolts, there's 2 U-bolts on each side, and
right.
Each U-bolt has a nut, and each U-bolt has threads that go up much farther than the nut is right now. But those threads are all corroded and filled with rust and dirt and shit, and you can't just tighten up the nut. So put some grease or something on the threads, oil on the threads, run 1 nut off, put 4 3/8 washers onto the stud, run the nut up to where it used to be so that it squishes the pads a little bit more than they're squished now. Then do the next one, do all 8, and that'll take care of most of your problem. All midgets torque steer just a little bit. They all do. But if it's really bad, that'll take care of it.
No, it's not real bad. It's just I finished rebuilding the engine. I think I have a little more torque.
A little more torque, yeah.
and I've started noticing it.
Okay, yeah. Well, normally you just drive through it, but once you notice it, it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But the problem is the rear axle is loose on the leaf springs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. So that was pretty good. Okay, Darren has asked some more people to mute. I'm going to mute everybody right now, just because some people are unmuted and we got barking dogs and screaming kids. Okay, Bob with a 77B. I have a hard time oiling the brake pedal other than shooting WD-40 from up inside the car. Is there a better way to oil that joint, that pivot? Not really. I don't know anyone who's ever oiled that. So I don't know why you oil it, because it squeaks?
It squeaks. It absolutely, it's on. I mean, it just kind of quits working after a long winter.
Ooh,
okay. I've had to do that the last 2 years.
Okay. So
and I put a rag underneath the pedal and then just shoot the hell out of it. But
all right. So open up the bonnet, get rid of the bonnet stay, and open it way up so you don't have to bend over and struggle, and take off the 27 screws that hold the top of the pedal box cover on. There aren't 27, but there's way too many. There's probably, oh my gosh, 9.
There's probably 4 or 5 on each side, yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's overkill. Little tiny screws, but just take them all off take the lid off, and then it's right there. It's right there, and you can see it. So now what are you going to do? WD-40 isn't a long-term solution. That's just an anti-squeak kind of thing. And if you put oil on it, how's that going to creep down inside? What I would tell you to do is to take the bolt out, drop it down, take the sleeve out, grease it all up, put it all back together. Tough to do by yourself because you can't push the pedal up and put the bolt through, because that requires someone inside the car. So you go, well, I'll lift the pedal from inside. You don't disconnect it from the brake master cylinder, but still, it's probably a couple person project. So, but that's one thing. So you got a bolt on either side. You've got a flange. There's a sleeve that goes between the flanges. There's a bushing that goes around the sleeve, and the pedal goes around the bushing. So right now the bushing is one with the sleeve. So you may have to disconnect the pedal from the master cylinder to get it out on the bench top, and use a punch and some heat to get the thing all apart. But once you do that and oil it all up, then if you're really, really crazy, you can drill a hole, tap it 1/4 inch.
Yeah, Zerk.
Put a Zerk in it, so that you can put a punt. You'll never have to do it again if you just do it. But anyway, yeah. So.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Let's see. Man with a dog and chips, please mute. Okay, Mike Palin. Thread of the grease Zerks on an MGA steering rack. Isn't that funny? I just said that. They're probably not 1/4-28 because the steering rack is made by Cam Gears, and the steering rack is still made with British thread.
Okay.
So it might be 1/4 inch British. That's 1/4-26. Probably. But, grease Zerks are made out of pretty soft metal. You can probably make a American one work. But it's not a grease. There is a grease Zerk on some MGA racks, and that lies up the nose of the rack housing.
Yeah.
Right on top of the pinion. But the other one that goes in the front, that's not a grease Zerk, that's an oil fitting. Mazda was selling oil guns for a while. You could buy them, but oh my gosh, what a mess. You got to get the oil in the gun and put the gun on there and screw the oil in, and oil comes out everywhere. It's not a fun job. So to get oil into the rack and pinion, which is not what you asked at all, I take the damper off the top of the rack above the pinion, the one that presses the rack down onto the pinion, and it's right underneath the radiator. And that's like a really huge 7/8 BSF wrench or something. If you got metric wrenches, of course, you can find something that works. Spin that cap off, and there's a spring and a plunger in there that push down on the rack, and drool 90 weight gear oil in there as your associate turns the steering wheel lock to lock, and then you eventually get to a point where you get as much oil in there as you can. If it's been already pre-greased for you and it's moving very sluggish, then you got to take the boots off on either end and move it way one way, wipe the grease off, move it the other end, wipe the grease off. And you do that until you're so sick of doing it that you're happy with the amount of grease you've taken out, and then just add more oil, and the oil mixes with the grease.
Yeah, I can get the little oil pump thing down onto it, but only when I've got the engine out and thing at the moment. But when it's all in there, I can't get any pressure down without hitting the fan and stuff.
Okay, well, it's probably 1/4 inch, probably 1/4-26.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think of another grease Zerk on the car that you could steal and put it in there. But I bet you could get just a 1/4-28. You're in Canada?
No, I'm in Pennsylvania, Reading.
Oh, all right, okay. So you can go to Napa and just buy a grease Zerk. And I bet you screw it in, and the threads will conform well enough to hold it in place.
Yeah. Can you see that?
No. Oh yeah, sure. What's that? I mean, oh, that's me.
That's you.
Where?
2016 Mgb engine rebuild it was.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, oh, that's out on, that's on Patterson. I recognize the workbench. Yeah, very cool, very cool. Yep, I loved having those seminars. I just don't have a place to have them anymore. Those were the seminars and the rebuild sessions. I can't, gosh, there were hundreds and hundreds of people that went through that rebuilt their gearboxes at the shop. Only ever had one guy be real upset. And we rebuilt hundreds of carburetors. That was lots of fun there. So, okay.
Yeah, I must admit. Okay, John, thanks.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Thank you very, very much. The next question is from Tony Caputo, and it's to everyone. He says, I have an oil pan gasket leak. I would tell you, no, you don't. First of all, I would tell you, no, you don't. Oil pans don't leak. Now, there are exceptions, but all oil moves down and all oil moves back. So if your valve cover is leaking, it runs down and it puddles around there, and it makes it look like it's leaking. Okay, it might be your side cover that's leaking. It doesn't say what year and model this is. Tony, if you're on, you can unmute yourself and come on.
Yeah, John, it's a 76 midget.
Oh,
but I put the indicator in there, and I was looking for the yellow with the UV light.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of it around the front of the oil pan. Now, interesting enough, those bolts keep on coming loose on the front of the oil pan. I don't know why.
Because those are into an aluminum housing, and the aluminum housing is stripped out, and the aluminum housing is held in place with two screws, two slotted screws, I think. So if you do take the pan off, then be prepared to rethread those. You can get thread inserts, helicoils, and if you helicoil that, then you can get that tight. So again, when you're doing a sump, the pan has got these embossed depressions between the bolt holes to give it strength. And when you tighten up the bolts, that area between the embossed sections draws up and goes once the bolt goes tight. So before you reinstall your pan, put a ball peen hammer on the top of where the bolt went through. Hit that ball peen hammer with another hammer with some supported on a table edge, and depress that down just a little bit, so that when you put the sump back on and begin tightening up the bolts have to draw the sump up and make sure that those embossed areas are making full contact. The other thing when you're putting the sump on is to use Ultra Black or the Right Stuff, both made by Permatex, between the gasket and the sump. But on the top of the gasket, use grease. Just use grease. So that when you discover that your helicoils are the wrong thread, or you got to take it back off again, it comes off. 2 years from now, it comes right back off again. Now, the front cover also can leak, but getting that off is a monster of a problem. So, change the oil pan gasket, and then just accept the leaks that are coming out of the front. To get the front nut off the front of that engine is just a monster of a project in place at home. You know, once the engine's out of the car, you get a suitably sized socket. That's what the workshop manual always says. Use a suitable sized spanner. It's like, well, dude, why wouldn't I use? But tell me, is it 9/16 or 5/8? But that's a really big nut on the front of that crank. You got to have an impact gun to blow it off and take the front pulley off, and it's a project. So next time, clutch.
Thanks for the info. Thank you.
Okie doke. All right. All right. A note from Mike. I'm the convener, and I've got the mute button. And Gary Greenspoon is here. Great. Already talked about the deal. And I'll talk to you more about that when I talk to you about the Oculus. Ron McDonald, would you have time to discuss changing the fluid in the rack and pinion on a B? Well, if you're going to change the fluid, then you've got to pull the gaiters off. I don't have it handy. It's on my phone someplace. But there is a Ford Motor Company gaiter. They're real expensive. You buy them from Napa. They're $30 a piece or something. But they are just miles and miles better than anything else you can buy from the suppliers for the gaiters, the bellows, the rack boots for the Mgb. So anyway, take those loose. The oil drain that's in there will drain out. Not much is going to drain out. On the top of the rack and pinion is an elliptical plate. It's held down with two half-inch headed bolts, 5/16, 18. They're coarse thread because they're into aluminum. And you take that out, and then underneath that, and there's some shims. Keep those shims. Underneath that is a plunger. And you can't get to the plunger until you take the rack and push the rack up. You push the rack up and it pushes the plunger just a little bit out of the rack housing. You can grab it with a big pair of pliers or channel locks. Lift that out. Then there's a spring and a brass button that are in there to put pressure on the rack. Take all that stuff out. Now go ahead and put the boots back on and just use zip ties. If you're real worried about your Mr. Original and you got to have the original clamps with the original screws, hey, go for it. But if you just want to make it work, use zip ties. And then drool 90 weight into the top of the rack. This is GL4, 90 gear oil. As your associate turns the steering wheel, 2.5 turns, 3 turns, lock to lock, back and forth all the time. You're oozing a little bit of oil, and you finally get to a point where it isn't going to take any more oil because it's burping out as much oil as you're putting in. So it's kind of a messy job. I suppose you can measure the oil and put in the oil, but how are you going to get that in? And you got to have a funnel and a tube, and just drool in the 90 weight. Put your kid's pillow underneath it to soak up the oil or something. And I'm going to mute everybody again because I hear someone is having a drink, and that would be nice. But anyway, just drool the 90 weight in there, and then once you get to a point where you can't add any more, as you're spinning the wheel back and forth because it's burping it out. Then you use grease to hold the spring and the plunger and the big silver plunger. You put that all back in, and then put the shims back on, but remove the thinnest shim. Always remove the thinnest shim. If you take a shim out of there and you've taken too many shims out, you can't turn the steering wheel. The steering's real stiff. Well, duh, put that shim back in. But the rule is take out the thinnest shim to make up for the wear that's occurred, and your steering will be just a little tiny bit better. So that's how I would do it in my garage on jack stands. I don't even have a hoist anymore. So anyway.
Hey, John, I just did that myself a couple of days ago, and the bolts that were in there were really old, and they were leaking oil after I put it back in. Then I took them out, put Teflon tape on it, no problem after that.
Okay, that the right stuff in Ultra Black works there too. So, yep. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Peter. Thanks. Okay, we got Mr. Christ here with a TF, a 1250. I had a new condenser fail after 50 miles. Frustrating. Glenn at MG Service in Tampa, Florida, wrote a note a while ago and said, for 100 years, the automotive industry has been making condensers, but about 5 years ago, they forgot how to. So anyway, it's you can get, resulting in a bucking, misfiring, violent. I'm gonna mute everybody again because we got some background here. But then, Conrad, Chris, you can unmute yourself.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Anyway, now the engine has a pretty loud tapping at low RPM. Okay, so what do you do about a tapping noise? You go for the stuff that you can. You double check your valve lash, you know, because if one of those goes out of adjustment, you can get some pretty loud tapping. You can let the engine idle and pull one spark plug after another, and see if the tapping disappears. Sometimes you can't hear that, but if it does disappear by pulling the spark plug wire, that means that cylinder isn't firing and something's happened to that bearing, that connecting rod. You can take a long screwdriver. Well, I got to lean here. A long screwdriver and put it down and listen around on the engine. Although it's hard to figure out where it is. You can take the spark plugs out of the engine. You can roll the engine. You can put a screwdriver down the cylinder. We got a lot of background noise. I'm gonna mute you again here, just because there's a lot of background there. But I'll keep talking here. You can bring the piston up to top dead center, and then turn it just a little bit farther so it's just past top dead center on this downward stroke. Put a screwdriver in there and lever it. And if you can feel that piston move, something terrible is going on.
That's encouraging.
Well,
John, sorry to interrupt you real quick. If Conrad mutes while you're talking, I think we're hearing the echo through him.
Oh, all right. Okay.
So if Conrad mutes while you're talking, we won't get his machine echoing.
Okay. All right. Somehow. All right. Thank you. But of course now he can't. But anyway, when we have to talk to you, anyway. So whoever sold you the condenser isn't going to pay for the engine rebuild. I'll tell you that. So you can stew about that tonight.
Yeah, I'm actually running a 30-year-old condenser out of my Mgb when I switched to Petronics.
Yep. So anything else is pretty hard to find. You know, you can, you know, it's so hard because you can't move the rods much. You know, did you break the crank? A broken crankshaft, the engine will continue to run, make a hell of a racket because the two parts of it are firing. You know, it's just what's going on. So no doubt you're going to end up taking the head off and the pan off. And that's why you use grease on the sump, so the sump comes off even on a T-type. So you can reach up in there and see what's going on. So it doesn't sound good, but always do the simplest, easiest, cheapest stuff first. So that's, you know, adjust the tappets. See if you can get the pistons to move. You know, that's you can put a big screwdriver behind the front pulley and see if you can get the front pulley to move forward, pulling the crankshaft apart, as it were. Can't do that with the flywheel because the flywheel's back there. So I don't know. That's so sad to have something like that happen. So you're calling from Kansas City or where?
I'm calling from Virginia.
Okay. There was a Walt Christ in the Kansas City area that was a big MGA guy for years. I just recognize the name. Then there was another guy named Christ in northern Indiana who owned a deluxe. He had a Christmas tree farm. So.
Oh, thank you, John.
Anyway, yeah, I sure wish that I had better. So anyway, Gary Greenspoon here. He came late into can anyone send me the audio to reply? Anyway, to see this afterwards, yes, I am going to I am going to put this up on YouTube. I've got one or two before this to put up, so I will have it. I don't know the volume of the oil to put into the differential. I don't, but if the car is horizontal, there's a plug. You take the plug out and you fill it up until it runs out. Stop there, put the plug back in. That's really easy on the diff. But if the car is jacked up like this, then you're going to end up with too much oil in, you know. So you have to let the car back down if you're working on jack stands. But if you're taking it to a shop in Vancouver, they're going to have hoists. Nobody has a shop anymore without hoists. Okay, Tom Cohen, 68 Mgb loses power at 70 miles an hour going up a hill. Okay, so why is it losing power? Tom, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Okay, and that's so it could be, you know, I mean, it could be timing. That's where I'm going to go first, because that's where I always go first, because most problems are timing problems. But it could be if it's snapping and starting to snap and pop, hiccuping, then it could be because you're running out of fuel. If it starts to run on 2 cylinders, that's because you're running out of fuel. So the 2 things to check: cheapest, easiest, simplest things to do first. Check the timing, and the timing should be 32 degrees before top dead center at full mechanical advance, vacuum disconnected. It's a 2-person job, absolutely, on an MGB, on a 68B, because the timing marks are on the bottom. You only have 3 timing marks, right? Only 3, 0, 5, and 10. 32 is way up the side. You can't see it. So you have to use a dial back timing light to set the timing. And you can call me tomorrow. I'll tell you about it. Beg, borrow, or steal a dial back timing light, hook it up, and disconnect the vacuum advance. You rev the engine up until it's running really fast. I mean, it's up around 3,000-4,000 RPM. Wherever the advance mark on the pulley stops moving, and then you make sure that it maxes out at 32 degrees. So that would be the most common reason that you're having the problem there. The next one is a fuel supply, and you can take the line off the carburetor. That's kind of hard to do because of where it is in the back there. Actually, what you should do, you get that tight 90 that feeds the rear of the carburetors. Don't you, on the 68?
I think so, yeah.
Usually what I do is take like 1.5 foot of hose and do a loop like this, come out of the hose and loop it, and also put a gasoline filter in there, because they put no gasoline filter in there. So that's always a good idea.
I've got a filter in there. Also, what I've got is an aftermarket, I don't know, an AutoZone fuel pump attached back by the fuel tank. Okay. And which was a little, I have a pressure gauge, or I had a pressure gauge on the fuel line. So I put a regulator on that. And I think I have it regulated to 4 PSI, something like that.
That's good. That's good. As long as when you take the line off and put it into a can or a bottle, you get a pint a minute. I mean, that's just a lot of gasoline. There's no way you can use more than a pint a minute. But that's what the spec is.
Yeah,
so,
if I back off on the throttle, then it'll pick up again. If I go a little slower,
that's timing. That's timing.
Okay. Timing, huh?
So you can static time it at 10 degrees before top dead center. So you've got a 68, 411, I can't remember the distributor number. And it's got a 68 still has 10 degrees of distributor advance, which is 20 on the crank. Mm-hmm. So 20 from 32 is 12. So if you bring the engine around until the timing mark is 12 degrees before top dead center, which is, just an incremental bit before your first mark, you can't back up to it. If you go past it, you can't back up to it. You have to back up quite a ways and come at it again because there's slack in the timing chain. And then put a test light between your distributor, pull the low tension lead off the distributor, put a test light on there, put the other end of the test light on your top fuse, which is always hot, and hold the rotor clockwise, caps off, hold the rotor clockwise, and then turn the distributor clockwise until your test light just goes out. Lock it down there. That's set at static, 12 degrees static, which is the proper place for the car to be to get to 32, unless there's some other distributor in it, unless the automatic advance, the weights are all frozen up inside the distributor. There can be a lot of other problems in there. So usually, when you take the cap off, you can feel the rotor. You can look at the distributor cam. It should turn 10 degrees, which isn't much, but it should be free to turn. If it's frozen, you got to take the distributor out and free it up, or send it to one of the distributor guys. I just got 2 distributors back today from Rob Vadinsky at British Vacuum Unit. I use him and I use Schlemmer both at Advanced Distributor in Minnesota. And getting the distributor, I go back to it. The engine's huge, right? The engine's is a great big thing, and the carburetors are as big as 2 fists. And there's 2 of them, but the distributor is only as big as 1 fist, and its proper operation is so critical. It times the spark, it makes the spark, and it distributes the spark. There's a lot going on inside that distributor, and a lot of them are really in tough shape. And if you send it off and have it rebuilt, oh boy, it's really great. But try this other stuff first because it's cheaper, easier. It's right there. So either static time it if you can't get your hands on a dial back timing light, or set it with a dial back, which is better because then you can actually see the advance move. It's moving, and let it max out at 32. So if you got any questions on that, Tom, call me tomorrow. Call me Friday, and I'll walk you through that stuff again.
Thank you.
Okay. So vapor lock, Vince Palika is weighed in here and said vapor lock is the term for when gasoline boils or evaporates in the fuel system. And that's correct. We were talking about that way before in the boiling gasoline. But usually vapor lock is usually before the fuel pump, between the gas pump, between the gasoline tank and the fuel pump. So the fuel pump is sucking the gasoline in, but it can't because the gasoline's been turned into vapor. So it's just trying to move gas, and it's not designed to move gas. It's designed to move liquid. So when it boils on the other end, from the fuel pump up to the carburetors, that's maybe that's still technically vapor lock, but that's something else, and causes an erratic mixture inside the carburetor. So a vapor lock is when you don't get any fuel to the carburetor, which is a real common problem with the midget 1500s because of the way the fuel line is routed over the hot gearbox. So okay, from Blake, here we got Blake Scanlon, who's weighed in well over an hour ago, who says you can buy recreational 90 octane fuel at many gas stations near boating areas. But the downside is it's $1 a gallon more, but that's only 12 bucks a tank. Pay the money, go out and have a good time. All right, so now I get a note up here from Fran, and I got, we're coming up to about the end of the seminar, and it says 67 more messages on here. So I really apologize. There's just no way in 2 hours to get to everybody's questions and answers. You can call me. You can call me anytime. If you send me an email You know, if you have, I don't always answer my emails, and I don't always answer them in a timely manner, for which I apologize, but that's a fact. So if you want an answer, call me. I'm always on the other end of my phone. If I don't get it, I'll call you back. You know, help me out. Go to my website, push on that PayPal button. All right, so Fran, I have a question about removing the body on my 1959 MGA because the frame is out of dimension, which prohibits me from getting the door openings right. I can't fix the frame without removing the body. But I've heard you say do not remove the body until you get the doors right. It's a catch-22 here. What do I do? Oh boy, well, if you're anywhere near Denver, Colorado, you can take your frame or your body to Paul Deershaw at Sports Car Craftsman, and he can make them all just absolutely excellent. So I guess you've got to lift the body off the frame, support it, you know, reinforce it across the top so it doesn't collapse, lift it up, then get the frame straight. But that's dicey because what are you going on? You know, what kind of dimensions are you using? How do you know that those frame rails are straight? You know, and then once you get the frame fixed, put the body back on, and then get the doors, or find out where the body is faulty, and put a jack under both sides of the body there. And you know, if the frame is actually collapsed in the middle, I could say, "What are you doing? Buy another car." But jack it up straight. You know, try to get the frame as horizontal as square as you can. But if the body's actually been twisted, like twisted, you know, in an accident or something or other, oh my gosh, maybe find another frame. That's a lot of work. That's just a lot of work. And you know, the same gasoline that was in the car when it was produced at Abingdon isn't what's in the car now. The same brake pads aren't on there now. There's probably the same fan belt isn't on there now. It's only a question of what you change. You know, and some people say, oh God, I can't change the frame because that's the frame that came with the car and everything. But you have to decide what you're going to do. So, Fran, you can call me. I'm happy to talk to you about it. I can email you. Maybe I'll put that up on along with wiring that tech. I've got a little short article about how to restore an MGA. Carl Heidemann and I used to go to Carlisle to the import show there, and I had a class that was how to restore your British car in an hour. And these people would come up and say, "Well, dude, I mean, you can't restore a British car in an hour." I said, No. The class is an hour long. So anyway, there's a lot to doing an MGA. MGAs are the most difficult of all the MGs because everything's in motion. There is one straight line. It goes from the rear of the front wheel arch to about the back of the door, and is about 1.5 feet tall, and that's a relatively straight line. It curves, you know, but front to rear it's straight, and that's it. There are no other straight lines on the car. Everything's a compound curve. That car is just a terror to make right. So anyway, okay, how do I see who's speaking to John? You know, usually when people unmute themselves, it comes up. And I know there's a gallery view, there's some stuff up above and below, but I'm not, as often as I've used this, I'm not sure. Here, somebody says, put it on speaker view. Whoever's speaking will pop up. So top up with Rob Brackett's weighed in here at the top right. So, okay, let's see, this is Mark Goldfarb. So Mark, you can weigh in. The last meeting, you suggested using gear oil in the dash pots instead of automatic transmission fluid. I did that the next day, and the difference was awesome. This is a direct quotation. The acceleration is much smoother, and I haven't added any since then. With the ATF, I was adding some almost after every drive. Thank you. You're welcome.
It was a big help, John. I appreciate it. And I drive my car a lot. So just in that time, I've probably driven 600 or 700 miles. And
oh my gosh. Okay. All right.
It was noticeable immediately. So I appreciate the
I got in, I didn't get into a knockdown drag out with Laurie Alexander. He's the guy who did the Moss rebuild video. That's a nice video. It's still, there's no humor in it. It's just straight. But I got into a discussion one time with him about ATF engine oil 90 weight, and I made my case for it. And I as I remember the conversation, the two people, they can remember the conversation in two different ways. He sort of come around to understanding what I meant. I'm not sure he agreed with me wholeheartedly, but he understood what I meant. But the whole goal is to hold that piston down just a little bit longer so you get more acceleration. You get a richer mixture. Okay, here, Fran's back here with a question about removing because the frame is out of dimension, but I've already answered that. So, Crystal, okay. So here's a real one. Any suggestion on how to remove the forward bolt in the leaf spring that's rusted in the bushing? Sawzall. So you can, it's just awful. So you got to get a Sawzall, and Crystal, you're on. You can unmute yourself. I see you there. I mean, I don't see. I just see the name, but there's anyway. You take the leaf spring and you disconnect it at the back. You disconnect the U-bolts. Now it's just dangling, dangling and swinging. Then you got to get the bolt head off. You've got to get the head of the bolt off. So you got to use a Sawzall. And if you're going to do that, you got to be real careful not to cut the ears, because you got to cut square. So you can go between the ear and the spring. And again, the Sawzall blade's going to end up hitting the body and bouncing back. It's a mess. At the shop, we used to take a torch and burn the head of the bolt off, just melt it away. But at home, the best you've got is a Sawzall. Hardly anyone's got an oxyacetylene torch. And the worst you've got is a handheld metal saw. Blank.
Hacksaw.
Hacksaw. Thank you, Jeff. Hacksaw.
Well, I've already tried the Sawzall and cutting the leaf spring, but all I accomplished was, dulling the blades of the Sawzall.
You can't cut the leaf spring because the leaf spring's made out of special metal, and I'll give you a warning here too. You may not want to put new springs on your car. You may want to take your old springs to a spring shop, and maybe for $150, they will re-arch the springs. I always tell them to replace the second leaf. Just don't even argue with it. Just replace it. You can't change the main leaf because that's got the swirls in it for the bushings. But the second leaf, just change it. And I don't know what they do. They've got great big furnaces. It looks like some scene out of Dante. They heat the things up. I really don't know what they do, but we'd get them back and they'd be great. There has been, I don't know if there's a problem today, can't say, there has been historically a problem with leaf springs, not coil springs. Coil springs are great, but leaf springs. Either they're too stiff and you can't even get them on, or the ass end sits way up in the air, or they're different and the car sits on an angle, or the car drags right away, or it sits just fine for 2 months and then it falls. So I know there has been a problem with the quality of the leaf springs, and I would suggest that you take yours. Any truck shop will rebuild your springs. So it's a whole lot cheaper. But anyway, cut the head of the bolt off. You got to get the head of the bolt off. and either between the leaf spring and the ear, or between the ear and the head, and then use a big pry bar and bend that ear out of the way just a little bit. Now you've got the spring hanging with the rest of the bolt out the other side. Now take the leaf spring and bend it up so the ear bends. Oh, I know it sounds terrible, but this is the way you do it. Bend the ear up out of the way, and the leaf spring and with the bushing and the bolt just fall out of it. And then when you go to put it back together, you got to get some big channel locks and get on those ears and bend them back into place. And then when you put the bolt through it and tighten it up, it'll work. Make sure you use anti-seize when you put it back together. If you order the front bushing and take that to the spring shop, they'll replace the front bushing for you. That you can do it at home, but oh my gosh, what a project. So just easier to have somebody that knows how to change those front bushings. So anyway, cut the head off, push the ear out of the way, bend the other ear with the leaf spring and what's left of that 7/16 bolt out of the way, and then just drop it down. So that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope that's some help. Happy Ringo Starr. He's not 89, John Begg. He's 80. He's not 89. He's 80. So will he fix my carburetor? Probably not. Although Jay Leno could, you know. Joe Jeselnik. In the process of converting to wire wheels, has anyone have experience with tire balance beads? I'm having difficulty mounting adhesive weights to the outboard side of the tire. There's no room. Looking to avoid standard clip-on lead weights. You know, you can try motorcycle. Well, I don't know. Anyway, motorcycle shops will balance your wheels. I know, I took some wheels to my motorcycle shop, and he says, I got them balanced up to 150. And I said, then they ought to be just fine to use. Balance beads, it used to be that anything inside a tire was a death knell to trying to balance it, because you get it balanced and then this ball bearing or BB or rock or something would move around to someplace else. And now they sell BBs to go on the inside and call them balance beads. I don't know, is anybody had success with those? Those adhesive weights. You know, 3M makes that glue, 08090. It's upholstery glue, so I don't know if it'd work here, but that stuff's just dynamite glue. That's we used to use 08088 3M glue, 08088 for everything upholstery, because 08090 you cannot make a mistake. If you glue something together, that's it, you're done. So I don't know if that glue would help in this case or not, Joe. So, all right, so there's Joe, I see you there. So from S. Holt, Steve Holt, I always suggest building a do-it-yourself smoke injector, a pickle jar, a bicycle pump, and an old sock soaked in baby oil and heated by an old soldering iron will help you find it. Help you find what? I don't know what, I don't know what, Steve Holt's still on here?
Vacuum leak.
Oh, all right. Okay. Okay. Except that you got the fan going in the front of the car, and that's giving you quite a wash. Some people say,
No, this is Rich talking. One of my son's girlfriend's father just lent me a contraption that's built for this. You put a bag over one of the air cleaners, you put a bag over the other with a tube in it. And instead of an air pump, you put one hand to the compressor, it heats the oil, it makes smoke, it blows it into your engine while the engine's off, and you can find a vacuum leak without running the motor.
well, the engine's off. Okay. All right. unless the exhaust valve is open. So so you just have to rotate the engine. Then you might have to take a couple different positions. Yes. Interesting. There's always something. Like I wondered. I had an employee named Steve Holt who lives in Nashville. I was surprised to see him on here, but anyway, Rich, pleasure to see you. So Lou Balla, when using the choke on a 64B, how much travel should the fuel intake piece go down on the bottom of the carb? That's the jet. It should move a lot. Well, what is a lot? At least 1/4 of an inch, if not 3/8, almost half an inch. The farther that jet drops, the easier it is to start the car. So when you pull that choke out and the rotary cams move, it drops the jet, and that's with a little angle piece down there. And if you're not getting enough movement out of the jet, you can take that angle piece off the cam and just take it off the jet with a Phillips screwdriver and straighten it just a little bit, not too much, little bit, and put it back into the jet, and then it'll have a higher starting point, and it'll drop the jet more. But make sure you got full movement there, because if that jet drops 3/8 of an inch, you can start it in Antarctica. You really can. So it's 9:07. I think we'll go about another 10 minutes here. Thanks for everybody for hanging on. We're down to 103 people, but anyway, thanks. Next one from iPhone, about a 1500 midget. Is there a tool available that can get onto the crank nut without removing the engine or front axle to turn the engine by hand? You can turn the engine by hand by putting it in 4th gear and taking the plugs out and pushing it. You can turn the engine by hand. That's about it. So no, that's just a huge nut down there, and it's I don't know. Brian McCullough says yes, but I'm not. If Brian's still on, maybe he'll unmute.
I am.
Okay. So how do you?
I actually, John, I actually said yup when you were talking about quality of components.
Oh, all right. Okay.
And
okay. Yeah.
You BMTA, you know me. But yeah, the whole yup is yes. I agree with that. And it's basically they're trying to build to a dollar amount. So I apologize. Well, I thought we were keeping up on that. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Brian's got a shop in on the north side of Minneapolis. Got lots of cars in there. You still got that Daimler in there?
Yes, unfortunately. I mean.
Okay. All right. So it was. I don't know. It was 20 years ago, and Moss shouldn't be using their name. Came out with a Lucas wing mirror. It was beautiful. It was just dynamite, but it wasn't just it just wasn't there yet. It was in the catalog for $9.99, and it just I called up the guy who was doing all their quality control and purchasing in Taiwan at the time, Chris Nolan, and I said, Chris, God, this is so close. Why don't you guys? I didn't say, why don't you give me a better product at $9.99? I said, why don't you spend another $5 on this and make it just dynamite, so it's really, really good. And he said, okay, all right. So we make this really, really kick-ass mirror. It's just tremendous. And we have it in our catalog for $14.99. And Leo has his mirror in the catalog, Leo Long of Victoria British. He has his mirror in the catalog for $9.99. Who's going to sell mirrors? That's the answer. That's the answer. Everyone, it's all driven by price, and it's too bad. It's not driven by quality. Those of us in the trade, Brian and everybody else in the trade, I don't care if the part, instead of costing $50, if the part costs $200, I don't care. I'm going to make more money on it, and it's going to work. I don't mind. I don't mind paying more money. I'll rationalize it to my customer, because I don't have to do the job twice. but it just isn't the way it is, you know. And there are not enough people that are that buy quality. Everyone, and everybody says, "Oh, I'd buy the more expensive one." Well, they don't. You talk to Moss, and you know how, you know, when they got two competing things out there, one classic gold, which is their high grade, and the regular one, they sell more of the regular one. People buy by price. It's very frustrating.
Sometimes it's helpful to buy the stuff straight from the UK. It seems like you pay quite a bit more money, but the quality is very, very good. It must be made in India.
My experience is that just because it comes from England doesn't mean it's from England, and doesn't mean it's any better. And the shipping's really easy. There's 4 or 5 firms there. You can go to England, you go online. There's the Beehive, there's the MG Owners Club in Swayze, the Brown and Gammons and Baldock, Herefordshire. There's Moss. Why not buy from Moss? We go, well, I already tried Moss. Well, guess what? Moss in England doesn't have the same parts as Moss America. So not always. Sometimes they do. So yeah, it's and they're better part. People have different parts of the rubber that goes on the underside of an MGB windscreen. You buy the one from Moss, it's really, really, really stiff. You buy the one from the Roadster factory, it isn't so stiff. And it's easier to handle. Probably doesn't last quite as long in its application. And then you can buy the one from Victoria, which is so supple that you put the windscreen on, all of a sudden it pops out of its track. So even in this country, there are different people making different things. And it's like, who can keep track of what's good? So it's real frustrating. That's all I can say is it's very, very frustrating. So anyway, here we got Charles Foy. We're down to it here, and he's restoring a 56 MGA, and he's got his car operational. He's got a seat in it, a gas tank, and a fuel pump, and a battery on the passenger seat, I guess, and it's all hooked up. And he can drive it without the body on it. This is not a bad thing to do when you've got the whole car apart. Driving it, even though you got to put the pedal box in and then take the pedal box back out, even though you got to put the radiator in, take the radiator back out, it gives you such a lift of going, oh my gosh, it's mobile. Well, it is mobile. Part of it is mobile, but it's a psychological thing. Unless, of course, the fourth gear grinds going into gear, which is in the case of Charles. Charles, you still on here? You still waiting here? We probably didn't get to your.
Yeah, I'm here, John. Thank you.
Yep. So anyway, he says he had the transmission rebuilt by the local guy who is reputable. That means that reputable doesn't mean that the car is going to work the first time out. It means it's guaranteed to work. That's what reputable means, because everybody makes mistakes. You get crummy parts, but he'll stand behind it. So anyway, yeah, take it out. Even though you got to take the tunnel and the floorboards out or something. Yes, okay. Take it out now, because if it grinds, I mean, you can't grind going into fourth because you're changing up. You know, the fourth gear synchro can be just completely knackered, and you don't need a fourth gear synchro. So if it's grinding going into fourth, something else is going on.
So it's not a synchro. It's something else.
No, but it goes into reverse just fine.
Yeah, every other gear is fine.
Well, then it's got to be the synchro or something. But that's really weird. That's really unusual. Call me tomorrow. Let me talk to you, or have your guy call me, and I'll talk to him about lapping, using valve lapping compound, lapping the synchro to the gear.
Okay.
So it's a real critical thing. So I'm going to take one more here.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, you're very welcome. There's still 76 messages on here. I apologize for not being able to get to everybody. I'm clicking through a couple of them here. Oh, here we go. Jay to everyone. Let's support this gentleman. A few dollars to his PayPal. Hey, Jay, you're my man. Anyway, just a minute. I've got to get through. Michael says, I found it easy. I found that to easily remove the front crank bolt, remove the front crank and remove the front crank pulley, use a 1/2 inch drive, 20 and 6-inch extension bars through the engine crank holes in the bumper. Yes, that works if you get an MGA or a T-type, but not a midget 1500. Here we got Truman Auctions, who said that he was late getting in because he was on another line, on another Zoom. What happened to WebEx? What happened to WebEx? That was the go-to place. And I haven't heard anybody say WebEx. You know, it's a Zoom. These guys are going to make and position themselves carefully, and this is real nice. So here we got Rich Caldwell, who's saying that he sent his front frame extension to Paul for his MGA to get the proper slices out. But our gentleman from England, Darren, probably isn't going to send his to Paul.
No, you guilted me into it.
I did, but Darren is way too far away. So anyway, here we go. When storing a 78 midget during our Canadian winters, should you pump the brakes to prevent possible corrosion in the brake system at the wheels? I haven't heard of that before. What you should do is bleed the brakes annually, or at least as often as a complete lubrication, which is every 5 years or every 12,000 miles, to get because it doesn't matter what you do, water gets into the brake system, and it sits at the bottom of the cylinders because the brake fluid is lighter than the water, and then the water rusts away the cylinders and wrecks it. Now, it doesn't make any difference on a caliper because usually the water is sitting below the piston, but it can make a difference on caliper. So anyway, no, I don't think.
Hey, John,
yes.
This is Rich again. There was a question at the end of that comment on the frame extension.
Yes. Running my 1600 on some occasions after 20 minutes, the engine starts to stutter and it quits after 5 or 10 minutes.
The motor doesn't quit, the stuttering quits, but it's very subtle. I'm listening. What is this? What is going on? And then 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, it's gone.
You know, if everybody had an O2 sensor in their exhaust, and you could watch, you know, how much is it not O2? Anyway, the oxygen sensor in your exhaust, we could see if it was a problem with the mixture and boiling gasoline. My guess is you've probably changed your coil relatively recently. I don't know that new coils are bad. I knew that some new condensers.
It's a new coil, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not it. Although I had a guy call me the other day, he was fighting a problem, fighting, changed the distributor cap. That was it, took care of it. Go figure, you know. I don't know, Rich, I don't know. Mixture, I guess. Anyway, we're back up into Canada here, and storing the car. Actually, that is one of the forms, I think, winter storage on my website. So you can go on there, and there's, you know, some people take their seats out, some people put duct tape over their exhaust, so the moisture can't get up in there and mice can't get up in there. We've taken engines out of old junk MGs, taken the head off, and there's a mouse nest inside the cylinder. I mean, you know, the mice get everywhere, and they're dreadful. So anyway, there's lots and lots and lots of things to do, but to store, you know, when you're storing a car, mice are a great big issue, and always store it with a top up. You know, that's it. I had one guy call me, says, I figured out how to keep mice from getting inside the car. Maybe I said this a couple of seminars ago. He said, I put the car up on jack stands. I put the jack stands in these big pizza pans, and I put used motor oil in the pizza pans. Okay, yeah, I suppose that'll do it. Keep the mice out. So there's just 1,000 things. So and Michael, same hat from 12 years ago? No. See, it's all nice and it's clean. Actually, when I order hats, I order about a dozen at a time, and then eventually the hats, something happens to them. They get old, they get nasty. I wash them, and then they get torn. Or I just went to a fire. I helped a gal with a power fire. That's what I call, you dig a pit, go to Napa and buy. We're off the subject now. Go to Napa and buy a 10-foot, 3.5-inch pipe, and I made a trench into the bottom of the pit and put my leaf blower to it. We started a fire in the pit, kicked on the leaf blower. It's like a friggin' blast furnace. We're pushing stuff in as fast as we push it in. It's turning into carbon dioxide and water. There's no smoke. There were some ash, and they came up and they landed on top of my head and burnt holes. I still wear that up to my little shop, but I don't wear it in public much. No, so, and these are not the same glasses from, actually I got this hat. First time I got the hat was from Dunn & Company on Trafalgar Square in London in 1972. So I've been wearing this same style hat since then. And I got the glasses, not these glasses, same style in April, I think, of 1971. So I've been wearing the same stuff. Here, I'm going to go for one. Want one more. John Hader. I've got an issue with the overdrive in a 78B. I had the gearbox and overdrive out of the car, and the overdrive oil pressure went to 425, and the speed changed when the solenoid engaged. Oh my gosh. So what's the problem? Oh my gosh. So he doesn't, John, are you still on here? John Hader? Are you still on?
Yes, I am. Yeah, there's another text entry down a little lower.
Okay. You're not related to Don Hader, who designed the MGB?
Well, that might be a nice claim if I was. I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Okay. Overdrive doesn't work. The overdrive switch got hot and burned the contacts. Great. We're on to it. So it's electrical. Something's grounding. It's not unusual. There's a whole jumble of wires right underneath the gear lever. And the wiring is, if you can imagine this in your brain, the wiring comes from the junction of the main loom and the rear loom and the gearbox loom at the rear of the right front inner fender, just back behind the fuse box. So the wire starts there. It's either by itself or it's encased in a black sheath. Starts there. It's plugged into the fuel pump circuit, unfused. Bad news, bad news. Cut that wire, cut it, and put an inline fuse in there, 10 amp inline fuse to protect your wiring. From there, it goes down to the 3rd, 4th lockout switch. This is what year is this?
78.
Okay, so it's a switch which is the least accessible electrical component in the vehicle. It sits on top of the remote control housing on the left-hand side. To get to it, you've got to drop the drive shaft, drop the exhaust, and drop the ass end of the gearbox so you can reach through the inside of the car. It's a real coarse thread, 14 by 2.0, I think, metric thread. So it comes right out, but you can't get to it. Your hands cannot get there without doing all that stuff. And I can't tell you where to drill a big hole to get to it. I thought about doing that a couple of times. Anyway, the wire goes from the front of the car, where it's hot all the time, to the 3rd, 4th lockout switch. From the 3rd, 4th, or the 4th gear lockout switch. From there, it goes to the switch up on the gear lever, the thumb switch. From there, it goes down to the solenoid. So someplace in the wiring, there's a short, and that's why the switch got hot. So it's, you got to take the console out, you got to take the gear lever apart again, which is a real problem because you've got that funny nut down there with the 2 slots in it. I made a special tool so I could tighten that up, but a 5/8 wrench fits underneath, and get that loose and get that thing off, get the gear lever boot off and everything, and then test the wiring. But someplace between there and down at the solenoid is where you must have a short. So I think it sounds pretty, it's not easy to fix, but it's easy to diagnose. And that's only because you told me that the switch got hot. And the only reason it would get hot is if there's a short and there's no fuse in the circuit. So put a fuse in the circuit too. So if you got some more questions about that, John, call me tomorrow or Friday or something. I can walk you through that a little more carefully. You look underneath there, it's just a jumble of wires. They're all yellow with tracers. And it's like, oh my God, where does all this stuff go? But it only goes to one place. And if you've got a basic understanding, I can sketch it out to you too. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, gentlemen, ladies, it's 9:30. I've gone for 2.5 hours. You listen to me prattle on and so forth, and there's still 77 new messages. I just can't get to them. You know, that's just the way it is. I will do my best to get this up on YouTube. So Gary, at least Gary from Vancouver, can watch and see what I had to say about your questions. Although you can go on my website and look under forms. There's a complete lube form, and next time I talk to you, I'll tell you too. And anyway, thanks everybody for this. We'll have our next one. Let me look down on my calendar here. Today is the 7th. 7 plus 14 is 21. So I would just say offhand, it'll be on the 21st. I'll send out a note to everybody on Constant Contact and also on the MG Experience. I don't have a way right now of getting your personal emails on the Constant Contact. I should. There's a place on my website you can click to get onto my Constant Contact list, but I think the link is broken, and so is my person who does that work. So anyway, but you can still go on my PayPal button does work on my website, so I hate to keep hitting that, but it's always appreciated. So I appreciate the contributions that all of you make, and eventually you will get thanked by me in an email. And maybe if I get my act together, I can actually list out the names and read through some names next time, because I do appreciate it very much. The only show I know that's coming up is still that's planned is the one in Altoona, Pennsylvania. But again, that's I gotta get some light here. Gone dark. Altoona, Pennsylvania, and oh, that looks horrible. That's going on, I think. And there's one in what's the one in Georgia?
Dillard,
Georgia. I think that's still on, but this COVID thing is just I don't think it'll change our lives for the rest of our lives unless we get COVID and die. But there's got to be an end to this. I mean, the Spanish flu only lasted 2 years, so I hope so that next year we can all get together and commune. In the meantime, drive your MGs. You know, I do every day. I had a pretty little girl today look at it and say, "Oh, I love your car, mister." Yeah. And there's always people that wave and so forth. How can you drive an MG and not have a smile? So unless, of course, you got a bad condenser. Your freshly rebuilt X-Pag engine has got a knock in it. Oh my gosh. I'm interested to find out about that. So anyway, gentlemen, ladies, thank you very much.
thanks, John. Good night.
Good night, John. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
I'm going to stay on for just
Thanks,
a little
John.
bit.
Much appreciated.
Hey,
See you on the 21st.
Everyone's unmuted, so now it's
Cheers, John. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John.
Goodbye, John.
See you next time.
Yep. See you.
Bye.
Hey, Sean English, I see you there. Oh, Sean just clicked off as soon as I said his name.
Thanks, John.
Hey, you're very welcome. All right. Oh, there you are, Sean. Sean English. Yep. Sean, I go to Washington, D.C. from time to time to do some work, and I was waiting at the airport. Here comes a douchebo. Here comes a douchebo down the ramp, and I'm thinking, who the hell's driving a douchebo? And it was Sean to pick me up. he said he had to drive that. He'd gotten too many traffic tickets, speeding tickets in his other cars. So he had to get something that would just simply wouldn't go any faster than the speed limit. Anyway.
Austin A40.
Yeah, well, yeah, probably easier to find a juiceable around.
I tried to get a speeding ticket. I can't get them, you know?
Okay. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, dear.
What's your daily driver, John?
My MGA, my 1962 MGA 1600 Mark II Deluxe. So that's what I've been driving almost every day. If I have to, I drove my, not an Eclipse, just a minute, it's a astronomical word. It's a Chevy Equinox. I've got a Chevy Equinox. I drive that. I had to drive that this morning. And I still have my late wife's 1998 Toyota Sienna with 240 some thousand miles on it. She'd kill me if she saw it, because I don't take care of it anymore. Actually, it's in hospice now. As it slowly fails and everything, I just don't fix anything. It's got duct tape on it. Another old white guy in a van, you know. So I got duct tape on the moon roof so that doesn't leak. But you know, it works like a pickup truck. It's really handy. You know, I'm a Home Depot whore. I just love Home Depot, and I'm there a couple of times a week. And I drive it down there. It works just great. I wouldn't take it out of town anymore, you know. But MGA, that's what I drive, as fast as I can make it go, which is oh my gosh. Today the speedo says 80, you know, and I'm passing almost everybody. So, you know, like out on the expressway. So, you know, it's probably close. I'm doing $5,000 on the engine, so just scream it. Rob Rackett, nice to see you here.
So good to see you too, John.
Rob drives a Bug Eye Sprite. I don't know where I just saw the picture. Maybe Rob posted it. I don't know, but here's a Ford F-150, and I don't know, a Ford F-350, and there's a Bug Eye Sprite parked between them. It's just it looked like a lily pad or something. It was a green one. So I thought
Looked like somebody left a toy truck between them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, gentlemen, ladies, if there are any ladies left, thank you very much.
See you later, John.
I'm done.
Bye, John.
See you later.